Purchasing a vehicle lift for your shop is no small feat, and though it's something shops shouldn't have to purchase often, deciding what lift will work best for your shop is a decision that must be made with careful consideration. Not to worry though, in today's video, we're going to cover considerations for shop owners when they're trying to purchase that lift, and recent trends in lifts. We'll also take a look at the manufacturing side of things to understand how lift manufacturers plan for new lifts and decide on what updates need to be made for older products. Here to discuss all this with me is Sean Price, Bendpak's Director of Product Development. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sean.
Hey, thanks for inviting me, Emily. Really appreciate it.
Of course. So, to kick it off, can you tell me what trends have you seen with vehicle lifts in recent years?
Well, it's been interesting seeing the rise of the EV, right? So electric vehicles becoming more prominent. Um, that that creates different requirements for things like a vehicle lift. It's very common with these EVs, the lifting points are on the extreme outside edges of the vehicle. And they're obviously set up that way to make space for the battery, right? And you have these big, massive batteries. There's not a whole lot of extra space underneath the vehicle. So the lifting points are on the extreme outside edges. So it's looking at the trends that I'm seeing are design changes to basically adopt that new lifting architecture or the lifting point architecture where we need to have arms that in a lot of cases might need to be narrower or shorter, right, to hit these points on these wider vehicles that are on the outside edge. And then now the safety factor, with a traditional body on frame or even traditional pinch weld, if that lift arm was to slip slightly, right, you still have at least a vehicle that it would portion of a vehicle that it could kind of fall onto and decrease likelihood of it actually falling off of the lift. Well, with these EVs, and actually it's not just EVs, it's a lot of these ICE vehicles have adopted this as well with these lifting points that are on the extreme outside edge. If there's, someone's rushing, they're not double checking, they don't have the lift arm right in the exact right point, and it's trying to spit out that arm. Well, if it spits that arm out, the car is going to fall. There's nothing there, right? It's spitting out to the outside edge of the vehicle. So it's placing more of an importance on those safety factors of making sure those arms are going to be strong and hopefully resist some of that lateral movement of it trying to spit an arm out. And then again, making sure that the arms are built in a way that they can not only fully extend to hit some of the traditional lifting points, but now they can fully retract and hit some of these lifting points that are wider and on wider vehicles, right? Which create less space between the lift and the vehicle itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, safety is just so important when it comes to lifting a vehicle and
Mm-hmm.
potentially having to work underneath that. The last thing you want is for that vehicle to come down on you.
Yeah, 100%. These EVs are significantly heavier, right, than a comparably sized ICE vehicle. So yeah, safety is extremely important.
So, what considerations should shop owners be taking into consideration before making these purchases?
Yeah, there's quite a few, right? So you're going to have limited space, so you want to fit as many lifts in a fixed space as possible. So you want to make sure, one of the features that we have on our AP lifts is the option to have a wide or narrow setting. So all things being equal, the wider setting is typically preferred, right? You have more clearance between the vehicle and the lift itself. But it could mean, if you're only limited to a wide setting, it could mean one less bay in a fixed shop space, right? And so having that option to have a narrow fitting or narrow option could result in actually an additional bay, and every single bay is tied to revenue potential. Same thing with ceiling heights. These are things that shops can't change without, significant added expense, obviously. The ceiling is what the ceiling is, and the dimension of the shop is typically something that's not going to change. So same with the ceiling heights, having an option, all things being equal, you want the tallest lift possible to accommodate the greatest range of vehicles, right? But in the event that you don't have optimal ceiling height, you want to make sure you're picking a manufacturer that also has shorter versions, and looking at lifts that are going to fully capitalize on the space that you have, both width and height wise. And then obviously the other factor is just looking at the cross section of vehicles that you're going to be servicing. In a lot of these markets, there's a massive number of EVs, and not every two-post lift is really optimized to work on an EV. You have considerations like clearance in the arm, right? It's very common that two-post lifts will have a gusset on the arm that goes from an elevated position down to the arm to add strength. Well, that gusset actually can create interference on these wider EVs, right? If they're trying to open a door or get the arm in a position. So looking at the not only the height of the arm when it's all the way down, right? The minimum lifting height, but also now the clearance of the arm itself. You could be going from an exotic that has body work on the side that actually hangs lower, and it has a lifting point that's actually further in underneath the vehicle, and you can run into interference issues. Also, again, as I mentioned with the EVs, with the lifting points being so wide, right, so far out on the outer edge of the vehicle, having that piece of equipment, making sure it's going to actually support a wide range of vehicles via the arms, the placement, the size. So yeah, it's really important to take those things into consideration when you're thinking about building out a shop, because it is extremely expensive. Equipment's expensive. It's even more expensive if you're not doing your planning ahead of time and you end up putting the wrong lifts and realize a little too late, it's, geez, for this segment of vehicles, which are becoming more common, I'm not really optimized. And now it's a position of not only repurchasing equipment, but then paying for someone to remove this equipment that's already installed. So yeah, planning is extremely important when deciding what equipment to purchase.
Right. Yeah, I can't imagine going through the process of buying a lift and then realizing that, oh, this doesn't work in my shop. So now I have to go through this process all over again.
Yeah,
And I'm sure it happens, but
it does, and we. It's unfortunate we've had a couple people reach out in that exact scenario, and we feel for them, and that is really really hard, and but part of it is well, a big part of it is just, again, making sure that you're really planning everything out, right, and taking everything into consideration. There's so many variables, from lifting points and vehicle heights, and some lifting points are way far forward and aft. Some of them are on the outside edge. Some are really narrow on the inside. Getting something that's going to work just as well for like an F-350, big diesel truck, all the way down to, like something like a McLaren that's really low with lots of that, body work on the side that I had mentioned, and everything in between.
so what would you say is the significance to having an ALI certified lift versus one that isn't?
That's a great question, and actually, that probably should have been my first point in deciding what shop equipment to purchase. Is you basically want to filter everything out that doesn't have the ALI certification, right, and start with the pool of equipment that is, that actually is ALI certified. So ALI, to oversimplify it, in most cases, what they're looking for is 1 point, at a minimum, a 1.5 safety ring. So for sake of example, if a lift is certified, ALI certified at 10,000 pounds, then at an absolute minimum, it needs to be safe up to 15,000 pounds. So it's having that buffer there to make sure that it's over engineered and extremely safe when leverage, when working with vehicles within the stated or certified weight range. There's a growing we're seeing some velocity with some of these really inexpensive lifts that you can see on, quite a few websites, Amazon being one of them. And, at Bendpak, we're always making sure we're keeping our finger on the pulse. And so part of that, part of my responsibility is looking at trends. And when things are becoming more frequent, it's very common. I'll order a sample and I'll analyze it. I'll test it, right? And then we'll give it to our engineers and have them actually do stress calculations on them. And it is scary that a couple of these lifts that we've analyzed, and again, these are the really inexpensive non-ALI certified lifts that people can get. you know a lot of these don't even hit a safety factor of 1. So in
Oh, wow.
that same scenario, if it's saying that it's rated to 10,000 pounds, when you break everything apart and actually do the stress calculations on it, there's a lot of components that do not hit 10,000 pounds. And so that's now really, really scary. Um, you know, the best case scenario, you damage a customer's vehicle, and with social media, they start creating all this negative press about you dropping their vehicle. And the
Right.
absolute worst case scenario is someone getting hurt or worse, right? So safety needs to be the absolute first and biggest priority. And the easiest, luckily, ALI has already done that for you. So again, if you just filter out anything that does not have that ALI certification, now you have that confidence that anything that you purchase within that ALI certification subset is going to be, safe equipment.
Yeah, that is such a key factor.
Mm,
Um, it's terrifying to think of somebody going out and buying a lift that doesn't have that ALI certification. And
mm.
just after hearing you speak about the tests that you've done, oh, I
It's
can
scary.
only.
It is scary.
It's
When I
kind of
saw
chill.
those, when I saw those reports, I was really, really shocked. It's very irresponsible, but unfortunately, there's no, other than ALI, there's really no other regulations out there that if someone lists a two-post lift as being, 10,000 pound, having 10,000 pound capacity, if it's not ALI certified, then there is really nobody contesting that. They can really say whatever they want. And I understand, as a consumer, it's attractive to look at, maybe cheaper equipment. But boy, if you really think about the long-term cost, aside from the fact that they're going to wear out more quickly, you're going to have to replace them more frequently. It's hard to measure the cost of, having one of those failures or accidents in your shop. It's just something you want to avoid at all costs.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, can you tell me about the latest products that Benpak is working on?
Yeah, we have a couple, really exciting piece of equipment that we've launched over the last year or two. We have a handful more that we're developing that we're really, really excited to announce to the industry as well. But in the past, some of the things that have stood out are our EV table, our EVS 4500. So this is a table that was really optimized for removing and installing batteries. And this was something that we started quite a while ago. And we were one of the first to market with a table that was really optimized for this type of a task. And when you think about these batteries are massive. On the light end of the spectrum, they're 1,000 pounds. So this is a 1,000 pound battery pack. They're massive, and the installation and removal needs to be. It's really a precision task, right? So as you're removing these batteries, you need to make sure that all the cables are removed. You need to make sure, in a lot of cases, there's connectors, electrical connectors. So as you're coming down, if the thing shifts or moves, you could break those connectors. Um, Even more important, the harder part is actually reinstalling them, aligning them. So again, this is a big, heavy battery. So If it was on a table that didn't have all the adjustments that we have a full 360 slide, 60-degree slide plate, right? So you can adjust everything effortlessly just as it gets closer to make sure that everything is connecting as it should. The electrical connections, the mounting holes are really precision. And so if you imagine having, trying to make do with a subpar table, or maybe trying to look at a table that was really kind of set up for drive lines, trying to use that. Now you have this massive battery that needs to be shifted a half of an inch. Well, moving 1,000 pounds a half of an inch or a quarter of an inch isn't easy. It's usually you're pulling it, and it's actually more than that because it's the weight of the table itself too. It's usually you're pulling on it and it goes a little bit too far, then you're pushing it back, and so in that scenario, that's when you start breaking a lot of the connectors, which are extremely expensive.
Mhm.
And then it just adds time to the process, right? If you're trying to get this reinstalled and trying to shift it around and adjust it, and it over fatigues the technicians. And so all the features that we have in here, like the slip plate, being able to adjust the pitch and roll to match the vehicle, make sure the vehicle's on the same plane as the lift. And then, it not being just a one-trick pony, it is something that is actually, very effective at removing driveline, transmissions, engines, subframe assemblies, right? So this EVS 4500 table, that was something that we developed that really opened up a lot of doors for us. Um, as I mentioned, already the two post lifts, we had redesigned the two post lift with a locking component. So the arms, as they're moving laterally, traditionally those will use a little bit of, it's like a half moon locking gear, and an even
Mhm.
smaller corresponding gear to lock that arm position. um, it can take, 250 to 400 pounds of lateral force to get those to fail. The two posts, the AP series of two posts that we redesigned, one of the big changes is this 360-degree locking mechanism. It's actually called AZARs, right? And it's a scenario now where the lateral force that we're able to push back on is in excess of 2,000 pounds. Um, so that's a significant jump, right? Now, that doesn't mean that people will never drop a vehicle. Again, people will always find a way. But, having that extra strength absolutely, helps, right? And creates that a much more safer working environment. So that was something that we had released not too long ago. We actually have mid-rise two-post lifts that we've just released that are 10 and 12,000 pounds. So in a scenario where, let's say it's a shop that just provides wheel service. Well,
Mhm.
in that scenario, you have no need to fully lift a vehicle overhead because you're actually just working on wheels and tires. And it's been, shared with us scenarios of some of the techs that are working there maybe after hours, or maybe even during shop hours. They're lifting the vehicles higher than they need to be, and that's actually creating unnecessary risk, right? If you don't need techs to be under a vehicle, if you don't need a vehicle to be 6 feet up in the air, then don't purchase vehicle equipment that allows them to do that. So we've created these mid-rise lift. They're full capacity, ALI certified, but they're limiting the height that the vehicle can be raised, to, again, decrease liability for a lot of the shop owners. Um, and then the latest one that we've announced, and it's almost going into production. It's so close. It's an 8-arm two-post lift. It's the first in the world. So it has 4 traditional lifting arms, 12,000-pound capacity. It has 4 additional accessory arms that kind of wrap from behind the post and up underneath the vehicle. And there's two main use cases for this. One of them is obviously you can have an EV up on the primary arms. You can get the auxiliary arms underneath and remove and install the batteries, right? So that's one big.
Mhm.
The one that we've probably got the most feedback, the one we're seeing the most excitement about is for cab off operations for trucks. So a lot of the OEMs now have realized that it's quicker and safer to just remove the cab of the truck if they need to work on something in the engine or in the transmission. Engine compartments are so compact now.
Mhm.
And so typically what happens today is they'll line a truck up, they'll take their two-post lift and they'll take the primary arms and put it on the cab of the truck and lift that up. Now, the problem is now the tech has to be on the ground, on their back, watching everything underneath to make sure all the hardware was undone. There's nothing else that's still sitting there. That in itself, on top of being uncomfortable and you're rolling around the dirty ground, is unsafe, right? You don't want them being down there. Well, now with this 8-arm lift, we call it Octaflex. Now they can actually put the truck up on the primary arms, get it up to where now the techs can comfortably access all the hardware, do everything safely, easily. Now the auxiliary arms can come up and you can either lift the cab off or you can get the auxiliary arms on the cab and lower the chassis. Either way, now they're in a safe, comfortable, ergonomical position to be able to see that everything that needed to be disconnected has been disconnected. And on top of that, it's not uncommon that when they have the cab off, they still need to actually lift the chassis up to access things underneath, for the motor, or if there might be a component of the motor where part of the task is on top of it, part of it is underneath. And again, if now the two post is already used up, being used or occupied by the cab, now again, they're crawling underneath the truck, they're on the ground, maybe they're using jack stands, which are really uncomfortable. So they can still, with that cab all the way up, they can still have the chassis and get it up to where, again, the techs can work comfortably underneath it. And we've talked to quite a few master technicians, and they're telling us anywhere from a minimum of 4 to 6 hours of time savings if they were to have this lift in place versus how they're doing it today with a traditional two-post lift. So that's something we're really, really excited. But just like with any product that we put out there, we probably overdo it. Some would say we overdo the amount of testing that we do before we feel comfortable releasing something to the market. We just want to try and make sure that we've thought of as many scenarios as possible, right? And make sure that we've accounted for all of that before we put that stamp and say, okay, this is done. Let's go into full production. So again, we're getting really, really close, but that is something that we've at least introduced to the industry as a new product coming.
Yeah. And I don't think there's no such thing as too much testing.
Yeah, well, it depends. There's the sales team. The sales team would tell you we're doing too much testing because they want to hurry it up and get it out there because they have so many customers since we announced it that
Mhm.
are like once a week. Where's it at? Where's it at? Is it available? I need 4. I need 6. Like, where are we at? And so the sales team's like, hey, Sean, how are we looking here? Are we almost done? And so I got to be the one to kind of pump the brakes. And we're working very hard. We're not wasting any time, but we are making sure we're taking enough time to, again, dot the I's, cross the T's, try and think of every possible scenario. And again, we're really, really close to going into production now. So we're excited.
Oh, no, that's so great to hear about the interest in the product too. I mean, I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure that makes you feel really good.
Uh, it was the first time a Master Tech. It was at one of the conferences, and this one was actually from Toyota. So Toyota just had their third recall that required a cab off operation for a Tacoma. And I walked up to the tech, and he's sitting there, and he's looking at it. And we had a truck with the cab off at the thing. He's shaking his head, and long story short, and talking with him, he goes, "Oh, I wish we had this, at our dealership with the last recall. It was just such a logistical nightmare of
Mhm.
getting the cab off, rolling the truck and chassis somewhere else, and putting on another lift to access the bottom of that. And then now they can only do half the vehicles, right? Because they're actually
Right.
using up 2 lifts for one truck. And there was so much wasted time in moving this cab and everything around. And he was just totally blown away. And then we were excited about it anyway, but that was the first kind of real practical feedback that I got back from a master tech that had experienced
Mhm.
cab off operation done, traditionally. And so that was definitely exciting.
Yeah. So, how do you go about planning the new products that you're going to put into manufacture or just updating some of your older products?
Yeah, a good portion of this comes from customer feedback, right? So I guess we'll tackling updating existing products. It's a little bit of a logistical nightmare for us, but it kind of shows our commitment in that if you look at something like just a standard four-post lift, we have so many different versions of that. And it's a
Mm.
logistical nightmare trying to track everything, right? Which version was what, right? But the positives, outweigh the negatives by, orders of magnitude. And then it's because when we hear something, we go, you know what, that's a great idea. We didn't think about that. Let's do it. And boom, we'll pivot. It's one of the things I love about Bendpak is how agile it is. We start getting feedback and it's, that makes sense. We're absolutely going to do it. Boom, let's make it happen, right? We start engineering it, drawing it out, and having our factory manufacture it. And so a lot of it is feedback from customers. Um, the other thing is a lot of us, the men and women that work here are automotive enthusiasts. So
Mm.
it's not only my job, but I'm, next to my family. The automotive industry is my biggest passion. So I'm constantly watching and seeing, the new vehicles that are being developed and the new trends and the new technology. And, likewise, our president and quite a few other people in the company. And so if we see something coming down the pike, something that's planned, a revolutionary design in a vehicle or some sort of change that hasn't been accounted for or addressed in the equipment offerings, then again, that agility really comes into play and where we're able to, boom, hit the ground run. Let's get the engineering team together. Let's start brainstorming. Let's go through the scenarios. Let's get some samples. Let's test them, and boom, let's get it into production, get out to market quick. So it's customer feedback, but then when it comes to the new stuff, it's seeing what trends are evolving and presenting themselves in the industry. And again, that just comes from the passion that we have in the automotive industry in general. It's not a task or a chore for us to be watching all these different videos or podcasts about new vehicles that are coming. It's something we enjoy. It's part of our passion.
Right. It's that nice intersection of job and hobby where you can
Hmm.
really bring that passion together.
Yes, I feel very, very fortunate for that. So, in my free time, I'm building hot rods in my garage. And so now I get, a lot of these events that we go to, shows like SEMA, right? That it's like I'm a
Mhm.
kid in a candy store and I'm there for work.
So, looking ahead, what are you seeing in those trends for the future of lifts?
It's the dependence on safety. Safety is the number one concern that any company should have. Um, but the other is efficiency and creating efficiencies. Um,
Mhm.
one of back to our AP lifts, it used to be that you would have to buy a lift that was optimized for symmetric lifting. You used to have to buy a separate lift that was optimized for asymmetric lifting. Um, you might have to buy one for a truck, one for a car, since it has lower clearance underneath. So when we and again, this was one of those things that we thought of quite a while ago. We were thinking ahead and captured this one early on. But the AP lifts now are set up to where they can be wider or narrower, they can be taller or shorter, and they are also optimized to lift either symmetrically or asymmetrically. So now instead of okay, I have 8 bays, I need to decide out of those 8, what percentage are going to be symmetric, what percentage are going to be asymmetric. And you could be in a situation where let's say you did half and half, 4 of them are asymmetric. You've got them loaded up with pickup trucks, and now a 5th truck comes. And even though you have 4 bays that are open, those lifts are set up for symmetric lifting. And so now that person has to either wait, or they're going to go, I'm going to go to the shop next door that can take me right now. So having, being able to diversify and have the flexibility of handling any task that's required. And again, that Octaflex comes into play there too, because these auxiliary arms, when they're not in use, if you just need a traditional 2-post lift, they actually stow up and out of the way. So you have the ultimate flexibility there. If you need to do a passenger car, a truck, something unrelated to lifting a cab or a battery or anything out from underneath, well, now this is just a standard 2-post lift, right? It's not like these auxiliary arms get in the way. They're up and nested and out of the way. And so that provides the ultimate flexibility. So we're always going to be keeping an eye on the trends, even when it comes down to, like the aftermarket, seeing that there's a lot more vehicles now that are really low. There's a lot of vehicles that have really, really low, these custom vehicles are really low, really wide. And taking that into consideration with accessories and designs to make sure that something like our 4-post lift is going to work for that, or even our 2-post lift. And so, but overall, I think the primary focus is going to be that of safety moving forward, because there's so many of these unregulated lifts that are out there, and there's unfortunately going to be a lot more, I think, accidents. And at some point, insurance companies, regulatory boards, someone's going to step in and go, okay, this isn't working. We need to have some sort of standardization when it comes to, the safety of the equipment, and that's where ALI comes into play.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate having the time to chat.
I appreciate your time, Emily, and I was excited to get the invite. So thank you very much.